Hey guys, it's Ray here. Welcome to Interrupting Sports, the show devoted to inspiring positive change. This is Season 1, Episode 7, and today I'm excited to talk to you all about what it means to be an inclusive fan. If this is your first time listening to my show, welcome. Grab a seat and get comfy. And for my loyal listeners, thank you for tuning back in this week. Remember to stay up to date on all things Interrupting Sports, new episodes, news, blog posts, special guests, and much more. Please follow us on Instagram at Interrupting Sports. And now let's dive right into this week's episode. Okay guys, so today we actually have a lot on the agenda. I got 3 topics for you, 3 different sports. We're starting off with hockey, of course, because you know I'm a former hockey player. There's always got to be hockey in there. We're going to mention the Stanley Cup Finals this year, Montreal versus Tampa Bay. Then we'll dive into a little bit of soccer and talk about the Euro Cup, looking at England versus Italy and how that all unraveled. And then we'll end off with tennis and talking about Naomi Osaka. So lots in store for us today. Happy to hear your thoughts on this. So feel free to leave comments on our Instagram at Interrupting Sports. Hit us up on LinkedIn, Interrupting Sports as well, or DM me personally at Ray Lambie on Instagram, and I'd love to hear your comments on this episode or maybe just how this influenced your fan perspective. Okay, so diving into hockey, like I said, we're talking about the Stanley Cup Finals that happened last weekend, Montreal Canadiens versus Tampa Bay Lightning. Personally, for me, I'm a Tampa Bay Lightning fan myself. Absolutely love Nikita Kucherov and, of course, Stammy. Have to mention him for sure. But not going to lie, I was kind of rooting for our Canadians here because, you know, the Leafs continue to disappoint us. And even though we'll be right by their side next year again, but you had to root for a Canadian team this time. But congrats to Tampa Bay on the win. Back-to-back, you got to give them the credit. But also kudos to Montreal for making it that far. So I'll take what I can get. So let's just dive into this series here. Looking at finishing off the regular season, Montreal finished 4th in the North Division. So this year, for those of you who didn't know, there was a North Division given COVID. So this year, we had an odd experience, which is actually very unique and really cool to me. We actually had all the Canadian hockey teams play in the same division this year so that they can stay constricted in their bubble with COVID. And then there was the crossover in the playoffs. So Montreal finished 4th in this division. The Leafs finished 1st, ironically, and look how that turned out. So Montreal made it to the final Stanley Cup, and that was awesome. And Tampa Bay, on the other hand, was also successful in their year. However, they didn't finish 1st in the division. I believe they finished 3rd. But either way, Tampa Bay has always been a great team. They have really strong players, and Montreal is a great team as well. But what happens is, the difference between the teams is really Carey Price, right? Carey Price runs the Montreal team. Without him or his efforts, there is no chance they would have even made it to the playoffs. So last week was the final game. Tampa Bay won the first 3 games of the series, and then Montreal just came in clutch for one win there to avoid the sweep, but that couldn't hold out in Game 5. So Tampa Bay ultimately won that 1-0. So why are we talking about this? Like, what does this have to do with being an inclusive fan? The reason that I'm mentioning this is because of the outright support that came from Montreal fans after this. So Montreal hasn't won a Stanley Cup since 1992. Yet they received unwavering support and loyalty from their fans, and it was great to see because they stood behind their team despite the loss, and recognized the effort that went into making it that far. I found on CBC News a quote from a Montreal fan that said, "It means a lot to us to see them, as in Montreal, make it this far. And I know we're going to come back stronger and we'll be there all the way. Unconditional love." That's amazing to see. You know, you see a fan who's saying, you know what, let's recognize the accomplishment. They made it this far. Yeah, they didn't win, okay, but they still put their best foot forward, and look where the Leafs ended up, and look how far we got. So you had to give the team credit for that. That's really awesome. So this is a perfect example of supporting your team despite losing. because I find that, and anyone can relate to this really, it's the fact that as a fan, you see when a team is winning, you have your bandwagon fans that just, hop on because a team is winning, and then you see them hop off right when they're losing. You have the crazy loyal diehard fans that no matter how much they lose, they still stick around, at Leaf fans. We also see fans who are there through the thick and the thin and also support the team. So they're not just standing by, but they're also voicing their opinion and say, you know what? We got to give these guys a round of applause for their efforts. And that's awesome because I truly believe that fans ultimately fuel professional sports. Like without fans in the stands, we saw that with COVID. Look how that turned out for the Toronto Raptors in basketball, not being able to even play in their own country, but have their fans by their sides in the stands. It makes a difference to their performance. So having fans that are supportive of you despite a loss means a lot, and I'm very glad that the Canadiens were able to have that this year. Okay, so that's enough hockey talk for now. I mean, truly, there's never enough hockey talk, but we got to move on. So like I said, we're going to talk about the Euro Cup. So this week, as you know, England played Italy for the 2020 Euro Cup final. Ultimately, Italy won in penalties. And the reason that this game was so significant was because the three black players on England, Marcus Rashford, Jadon Sancho, Bukayo Saka, all missed their penalties, and that is what gave Italy that 3-2 victory. So, personally for me, before we even get into the racial stuff, and obviously you guys know we're going to be talking about the BIPOC community, but before we even get to that, personally, my take on soccer is that's so horrible for me that you can end off a cup final in a shootout. To me, that's devastating because I remember when I played hockey and you're trying to make it to a final game, or maybe you're in the finals and you make it that far and one player makes the difference. The rest of the game doesn't matter anymore at that point. But aside from that, what we're talking about has a little bit more significance. So unfortunately, right after this occurred, right after, fans did not hesitate to voice their opinions. And unfortunately, it was for the worse. Marcus Rashford has a mural for his efforts and contributions in charitable givings. Unfortunately, his mural was defaced, and that's absolutely disgraceful because this is a soccer game. I understand we talk a lot about on this show how sports has a deeper meaning and it brings people together, and that culture is a great part of life and it has a higher meaning, of course. Absolutely, of course. But you're telling me that one shot, or rather one miss, now takes away any effort that these players put on the field, on and off the field. They work hard every single day, and it didn't go their way. It didn't. But that doesn't dismiss the rest of their efforts. Not to mention the fact that it's racist. On top of that, if we were just talking about a white player or just someone who wasn't of a visible minority, we would still be talking about this because it's wrong. But just what the cherry on top is the fact that we're only talking about this because all three players were black. Look at any headline right now, and I promise you it's not going to say the three players that missed their penalties. It's going to say the three black players because it's important that we identify the fact that the players that missed their penalties are black. Because that information is material and that makes a difference to the outcome of the game because they were black. Just in case you guys didn't know that. Of course not. Absolutely not. And it angers me that the media is able to influence society this way in such a negative light because we're honing on the fact that the players are black and that they missed. As if the reason that they missed is because they're black, as if there's some sort of association there. And it's as if, and you know what, this ties right back to my last episode. It's as if there's a higher standard or higher expectation of these players because they're black. As you know, we have that stereotype with black people being natural athletes. So you wonder if, well, they can't miss because they're black. that sort of mentality is what I'm thinking when I see these headlines, and I'm like, you're really disappointed here because black players let your team down. That's what I see when I'm reading those headlines, and that's absolutely devastating. Right after the game ended, I was with my family and I was on social media, and I kid you not, immediately, like minutes after, I saw a meme on Instagram from the Mr. Lewin account, very funny meme page, and it said, "If you're black in a pub, carry your things and go now." And, I laughed. I laughed because it's funny, but then you're like, this is absolutely unfortunate that this is immediately what everybody's thinking about, because they know everybody's going to be turning to the black community for disappointing a nation during a cup final. So that's horrible, because you're subjecting these players to a standard that is out of their control. They only can put so much on the field, and they did. They did their job. They showed up. They performed, and you know what? It doesn't go your way all the time, especially when you're talking about a penalty situation and shootout situation, right? Like, I don't know what the exact kind of stats are, but like from a high level perspective, either you make the shot or you don't. So it's a 50-50 chance. Continuing on that front, as if the defacing of the mural wasn't enough, social media, as you know, was a wreck. There were thousands of tweets that were racist, discriminatory, and just downright rude, calling out these players for letting down their team, quote unquote. And the racism is tied into many things here. You see monkey emojis being used, things like that. Unfortunate memes of telling players to kill themselves, joking around about it. They're adding humor to it. I know there was a meme that went around of one of the players jumping in front of a train and saying, "Don't do it." And that's downright disgusting. It's absolutely disgusting. Where there's so many issues wrong with here, I don't even know where to start, because we're talking about racism here. We're talking about making a joke of such a serious matter, suicide, and people are able to hide behind their screens and do this without being condemned for it, and it's so unfortunate. So I feel for these players. Fans go overboard. They do, all the time. This is unfortunately only one instance, but it's top of mind because it's fresh, it just happened. But I really hope that this is a lesson to us all, just to think before we react and rather respond to a situation. Because, it's the heat of the moment, we're upset, but don't resort to social media and say all these nasty things that you might not even mean. And if you do mean, then you need to be educated, and that's why we have platforms like this podcast. Because the outcome of the game had nothing to do with these players being black, and they should not be subjected to further scrutiny because of it. So the main takeaway here for the Euro Cup and these soccer fans is they really need to kind of look in the mirror and understand that this isn't okay, and that something has to change, and that you have to be accountable for your words, regardless if they're on social media or just in the media in general or in public, because they're still your words and they're still racist. You can't be calling people discriminatory terms, using things like the monkey emoji, booing them while they're taking the knee during the anthem. That sort of thing, that's not a fan. That is not a fan. A fan is ride or die. Look at the Montreal Canadiens fans supporting their team despite the loss. That's a cup final. That's a championship final right there. And look at the difference between those fans. So we really need to take a step back and reflect on this and understand the fact that we need to do better. Okay, so now we're going to take a little bit of a turn here, and we are going to look at the fans from a different perspective through the influence of the media. So now we're going to talk about Naomi Osaka and her withdrawal from the French Open a few months ago. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with Naomi Osaka, she's a BIPOC member, a Japanese tennis player, very successful, young adult, early 20s. And she chose not to speak with the media following her win in round 1 of the French Open tournament. And her reason was due to mental health reasons. So she was overwhelmed and she recognized that it was time to take time for herself. So she needed to take a step back and chose not to speak with the media following her match. In response to that, she was fined $15,000 by the French Open. And on top of that, officials of the tournament further scrutinized her by declaring that the Japanese player was exposing herself to possible further code of conduct infringement consequences. So they're saying your mental health doesn't matter because you're an athlete, which means we have to hold you to a higher standard and you have to do your job as an athlete, which doesn't allow you to take mental health breaks. Wow. So in response to that, Naomi did something very strong. She said, you know what? I know what's right for me. I'm taking that step back. And she withdrew from the tournament. She was able to have unwavering support from other athletes and fans for doing something so challenging and making that choice for herself because mental health matters. Like, I'm sorry, she's still human. Like, just because you're an athlete, if anything, I wouldn't be surprised if they go through more stress dealing with being a professional athlete so young, cameras on you, lots of expectations on you. Of course that's overwhelming. Not to mention, and she mentioned this herself, she's naturally introverted, so it even takes a lot for her outside of this circumstance to talk to media. However, the media did not take this light. They saw this as disrespectful, and they painted her in a picture that she was not meeting her obligations as a professional athlete. And like I said, the fans, other players spoke differently by siding with her and saying, hey, she's human too. And so the reason I'm mentioning this is because I found that it is absolutely interesting of how the media intersects with the relationship of the fan and the athlete. So what I mean by that is how the media is able to influence how the fans respond to an athlete's actions. Because in the other two topics I mentioned today, when I talked about the Montreal fans standing behind Montreal despite losing the cup, and I talked about the UK players who were dealt with the worst case scenario in dealing with racial attacks for simply missing penalty kicks in their Euro Cup final, no mention of the media influencing those responses. Rather, it was the media who then came after those responses and simply reflected on the nature of the event. But here we're seeing the relationship between the athlete and the media and the fan stepping in to support the athlete. And that goes into being an inclusive fan. This is a perfect example of standing behind your athletes and standing behind your fans because, as I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, fans are extremely influential to an athlete's performance. I couldn't imagine if not only the media wasn't backing her, but if her fans let her down too, where would Naomi Osaka be today? How would that affect her mental health? I imagine it would make it that much worse. And maybe she wouldn't continue to be using her platform to advocate for change and advocate for mental health. So it's understanding that everything here is connected, right? Everything you say, words matter, whether it's on social media, whether it's in the media, whether it's in public. Once those come to light, they affect everything. All right, guys, I know we covered a lot today. I just wanted to recap on everything we talked about. So I know we began talking about the inclusive fans of the Montreal Canadiens, who stood by their team despite losing in the Stanley Cup Finals to Tampa Bay Lightning, the defending champions. Then we moved on to talk about the Euro Cup Finals and how 3 Black players on the England team faced racial attacks after missing their penalties. So that's Marcus Rashford, Jadon Sancho, and Bukayo Saka. As well, we ended off talking about the French Open and Naomi's withdrawal from the French Open tournament and how the media portrayed her in a poor light, as well as tournament officials who did not support her, and the fans then coming through and stepping up and having unwavering support for her. So the key takeaways today is one, that fan inclusivity depends on the success of a team being supported. Like I mentioned, fans go overboard. Whether a team wins, whether a team loses, they go overboard. And it's understanding that either way, this influences a team and an athlete's performance later on. A team who is supported will feel motivated. A team who is scrutinized will feel that there's no support for them to come back next year even stronger. And unfortunately, that is the case for the 3 Black players on the UK team, on the UK national football team. As well, Naomi Osaka's faith in the media. The second takeaway here, and this is building off of Naomi Osaka's experience, is that media can really either bring people together or turn them against each other. It really depends on how they're portraying a team and how they're portraying an athlete. So we have to understand when we talk about these issues that the media has its own lens as well, and that may not necessarily be in agreement to that of the fans or that of the athletes or that of the leagues. They're a separate entity in their own, and they have their own voice, which is highly influential to everyone because naturally everybody is exposed to media. So they all get to hear it over and over again before forming their opinion. And finally, we're just going to go back to the UK football team here because I want to make it clear that an inclusive fan means more than having Black players on their team, because I'm sure before the outcome of this game, England must have thought they're super inclusive because you know what? We got 3 Black players on their team. You can't say anything to us because look who we got here and look who we're playing when when the game's all on the line. But I'm sorry, having Black players on your team doesn't make you an ally. Supporting, defending, and standing up for them when they are suppressed, now that's what makes you an ally. The fact that your own fans are booing them taking a knee, rather than supporting them for having the courage to do so, shows where you truly stand. Alright guys, so that brings us to the end of today's episode. I want to thank you for taking the time to tune in. If you're a new listener, hope you enjoyed this episode. And for those of you who have come back, thank you again for your unwavering support. Please show some love to your favorite podcasts and follow us on Instagram at Interrupting Sports. I'll leave you guys today with the message that your voice as a fan matters. So use it wisely. Thanks, guys, and see you next week.